Welcome back to Into the Gnar, where the cutting edge of software gets built. I'm Mike Stone here with my co-founder, Nick Maloney. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to make since we launched this show a whole one episode ago. It is vibe coding. You've probably heard the term. You may have an employee who's already doing it. And if you haven't heard about it yet, you will very soon because the bill is coming due for a lot of companies. This is the episode to send to your ops leader, your COO, anyone on your team who just shipped something with Cursor or Replit and said, look what I built. We're going to talk about what vibe coding actually is, why it's happening inside of companies that never thought of themselves as tech companies, and what happens when that AI-generated code becomes load-bearing infrastructure with no one to maintain it. Let's get into it. Nick, I'll go the vibe codes on your end.
I went deep this week. I went down a vibe coding rabbit hole that I didn't think I'd go down, but did. Completely outside of work. I got an email from my friends at Google and Nest saying that my subscription was coming up and it was $180 and my Nest camera was getting long in the tooth and it doesn't take much to convince me to buy some new toys. So I bought a new Reolink cameras for the ecosystem, but a new doorbell camera and got good reviews. It's good tech, got it all plugged in and quality was good and the live stream was good. But because it's self-hosted, you don't get all of the big brother functionality that Google provides, like alerts and facial recognition and all of that fun stuff. And I didn't really give that a lot of thought. And as I was playing around with it, I happened to have OpenClaw up and I'm like, gee, I wonder if I could vibe code something that replaces the Nest interface. I went down that rabbit hole and learned more than they ever wanted to about security camera spec and all that fun stuff. And it actually turned out much better than I anticipated. I went to town with OpenClaw. Like it even went into the admin interface of the camera, reverse engineered it, and then we got into facial recognition tech and all of that fun stuff. But now on like my home lab server, I have an app that gets the stream from the video. I can tag people in it. I get alerts on my phone and it works surprisingly well. It was a pretty intense vibe coding session. I will say this predates the cutoff from OpenClaw, so my approach would now be different. So it's probably my last like really good vibe coded session with Pinchy, my OpenClaw agent, but it was pretty fun.
Yeah, Pinchy's about to get a lobotomy, huh?
I'm optimistic. I don't know if I'd call it a lobotomy. It's now running on Claude, which I'll probably save for another episode. But yeah, the whole OpenClaw ecosystem has changed. And that might have a net impact on the number of one-star vibe-coded projects on GitHub. But I definitely loved it for what it allowed me to do for a lot of these projects. So I'm glad I got this one last run out of it.
Yeah, that's super hardcore. You're such a nerd. I love it. How would like somebody non-technical do that? Like, to me, that's outside of the stereotype of vibe coding in my mind. But granted, you were at the wheel, but not driving at the same time. You were on like Tesla autopilot mode or something.
Yeah.
If I'm non-technical, how do I build that?
That's the danger of giving a software engineer the keys to the car like this is you go down these like real technical tangents and you're learning about protocols you didn't know existed. And quite frankly, I don't know if there's an approachable way for many folks to do that. Not to say that you couldn't. I think it would just take a lot longer and just require like a level of patience to understand the moving parts, right? Like just to reverse engineer this, you have a stream of video coming in. So you need to vibe code and tell your agent, hey, there's this video stream and prod it to get access to it. And then once you have that, then describe what you want it to do. I guess it would be possible.
I think the short answer is you don't.
You just have to
That's
break it down into
yeah,
a lot of steps and just have an understanding of how it all works. Doable, but I think there's be some patience involved to read boring documentation and things of that. I think this would be an advanced topic for most vibe coding enthusiasts.
yeah. So I had an experience with a client that was more in line of what I think of when I think of vibe coding, that was like probably on the opposite end of the spectrum of like complexity to your project. But it was doing we were in the middle of discovery for a new app that they were building. And so we were driving this process of trying to figure out what this product was going to be. And in doing so, we created some prototypes. And the client was like, you're there, but not quite. And then by the next meeting, they had in Lovable like vibe coded a tool that just communicated the direction that they wanted that feature to go in. And it was totally throwaway. Like it was never intended to actually be used. Neither were the prototypes we were creating, but it was like the perfect communication tool for phase of the project. And we instantly just got aligned, and it solved a lot of the problems of non-technical people even like trying to like communicate design, or non-product people trying to communicate design, and just got us through a roadblock really fast. And it was a super successful version of vibe coding.
Yeah, I've had some similar experiences and completely agree. It's such a good foundation for requirements because you're not just interviewing or generating Google Docs. Like you have something that they've gone through cycles and tested and thought through to some degree. And they're not necessarily thinking about the constraints of the infrastructure or the hardware. They're just thinking about how do I solve this problem that I have, and letting the agent figure out the implementation details. But then you have this artifact that you can then take and run with it and solve for the engineering problems, but they've expressed their domain or their problem. And it makes it a lot easier to have that as a baseline than what we used to have, which was user interviews or maybe some simple diagrams. So I'm a huge fan of that approach.
Yeah, it solves a lot of problems. It also creates a lot of problems potentially, which hey, it's Mike. Before we continue, thank you for being here. Into the Gnar exists for one reason: to cut through the noise around custom software development and give you something actually useful. We want to build a community around that. So if something in this episode hit, or if there's a topic you want us to go deeper on, leave a comment. It genuinely shapes what we'll make next. Also, if AI is on your roadmap and you're not sure your team's set up for it, we made something for you. It's a free 2-minute assessment over at thegnar.com that tells you exactly where you stand. Link is in the show notes. All right, back to the conversation. Brings us to our news of the week. We've got 3 stories related to this topic. The first one, very related to what we were just talking about: 75% of decision makers will face moderate to severe technical debt by the end of 2026. Forrester Research predicts 75% of technology decision makers will face moderate to severe technical debt by 2026. I think I just read that twice. Gartner goes further, though, predicting prompt-to-app approaches will increase software defects by 2,500% by 2028. GetClear analyzed 211 million lines of code and found code churn has doubled and code reuse has dropped significantly since AI tools becoming mainstream. A lead dev survey found 54% of engineering leaders plan to hire fewer junior developers due to AI, creating a compounding future problem where no one will exist to clean up today's debt. So Nick, when you look at these numbers from the outside, does this feel like what we're actually seeing in the field?
That number seemed high to me at first, 75%, but it's probably not wrong. I think we're just starting to see vibe coded apps in the wild. And if they're not, and even if they're done with discipline, they have a lot of tech debt, especially when we get into MVP phase. And we always had pretty strong baselines of technical debt. So what I'm curious about is the increase of the historical baseline of what it was, and then what that looks like in like semi-relevant. I was actually working on a project yesterday with a team on a really old legacy application that had a ton of tech debt. And the relevant piece here is they attempted to quantify like what the impact of that was. Like, what does that mean from a leadership position? Like, what friction is it causing? And there's a few methodologies to do that. And they used one based on cyclomatic complexity, which is the linear independent path through a program's source code, right? I think in layman's terms, it's basically how hard does this make to work on source code and how much does it slow me down? And I think we're going to see a lot more of those metrics be used so that it can help inform when you need to pay that down. Because I think we need to accept that vibe coding is going to introduce technical debt, and maybe that's okay. But at what threshold do you need to address that? And then if you have an approach to quantitatively say, here's the point where it sucks and makes it hard for my team to use using something like the cyclomatic complexity, I think there's benefit to that. And we're going to see a lot more. It's a nerdy tangent, but it's going to introduce like these new ways to evaluate the tax of having that technical debt. Kind of a rant there, but I literally had this conversation yesterday and we went down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, but that tracks, and maybe it makes sense to get a little bit higher level for a second and just like roughly define vibe coding. Like it's basically these sites like Lovable and Replit and V0 where you can type into a prompt as if it's ChatGPT or Claude, and it'll make an app for you. So instead of giving you text back, it'll write the code. So you can type in, make a clone of Shopify or make a clone of Spotify, and it'll just make that for you. And in doing that, though it is mind-blowing and makes you feel like you have superpowers, it causes a whole host of problems, especially when you get into higher levels of complexity of what you're asking it to do. But when I read this story, I actually don't think, like, the headline says that technical debt is getting worse, but I think when the best models are being used by capable people, technical debt is getting very much reduced. My only complaint is that it duplicates a lot of logic, but I don't think this is an AI problem. I think this is a human problem. And it comes down to using the best tools, using the best models, having a good process around it. I think companies will cut corners. Like I've worked on a project where we use Claude Code and strictly Opus for the most part. And I was working with a developer that was just using Sonnet. And even in that, you're still buying, in my mind, the best company, the best LLM provider. But just the difference between Sonnet and Opus itself had vastly different results, and Opus was so much better. And they're only going to get better from the baseline today. So I think the debt, when managed responsibly, is going to go way down. I think the huge issue is that you just have people that are not equipped for the job trying to do something that they don't have the experience to do. And that's going to be where this 2,500% increase in defects is really going to manifest itself.
Yeah, my hot take on this is, and we've talked about this, I think there's a distinction between vibe coding and agentic development. And I'll oversimplify, but I think that distinction is your approach and the process in which you use these tools. Like when I think of vibe coding, I think, and I do this and I consciously make that choice. I just want to riff on an idea. I'll go right into Replit and start hammering into the prompt on what my idea is. And then like at the Gnar, and what we practice when we say agentic development is we have a lot of thought. We are building PRDs. We have a lot of process baked in. So when it comes to the actual code generation, we've established guidelines. We have our cloud prompts, our tools, and the code output is pretty lean and mean. I would say it passes muster for what I'd like to see as a software engineer. And it doesn't have that technical debt because we're following that agentic development process and it's not vibe coded. So I think maybe that's the message. If that becomes a concern, it is exactly like you said, one of process. And if you take this agentic development mindset, this largely goes away and your code is maintainable, manageable, and you can live with it. And it's not a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. The executives, especially like non-technical executives that we talk about or we talk to, they hate the term technical debt. They have a reaction when they hear that term, and it's what it is. In plain language, it's like every new feature takes longer and costs more than the last one. And eventually you're spending all of your budget just keeping the lights on and not able to build anything new. It causes just innovation to stall, and the term for it's technical debt, but no one wants to hear that. The executives are just fix it. It mounts over time and it's super hard to pull out of. And those vibe coded solutions, even if you get a small app from them, it's riddled with technical debt. And I guess we'll get more into that later on, but it doesn't really surprise me that the predictions of this type of debt are so high as long as vibe coding still happens. I think people are going to realize vibe coding's not as fun as they think it is when they actually have to maintain something in production. And if that's true and they lean on the professionals to do the work, then this may not be as severe. But let's move on to the second story here. This one's on comprehension debt, a new type of debt. AI generated code works until it doesn't, and then nobody knows how to fix it. This is a new term getting traction in the developer community. Traditional technical debt means code is messy and hard to maintain. Comprehension debt is worse. It means the humans responsible for the code don't actually understand what it does. Vibe coding was coined by Andrei Karpathy. Maybe that's his name. Maybe I don't know how to pronounce it. In February 2025, in his words, fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials, forget that the code even exists. Collins English Dictionary named it Word of the Year for 2025. Developer Simon Willison offered the key distinction. If an LLM wrote every line of your code, but you've reviewed, tested, and understood it all, that's not vibe coding. That's using an LLM as a typing assistant. Get Clear data shows AI heavy code bases will have 8x more duplicate code blocks than human written code. In January 2026, a multi-university academic paper titled Vibe Coding Kills Open Source argued the practice is negatively impacting open source ecosystems by reducing meaningful contributor engagement. And on the security side, AI co-author code shows 2.74x higher security vulnerability rates and 75% more misconfigurations. Nick, you've been calling this for a while. The idea that one bad line of code, Nick, you've been calling this for a while. The idea that one bad line of context is 100 lines of bad code. How does comprehension debt connect to that?
Good question. Yeah, I think even looking at it from the lens of you're going to continue with AI development on a project, if you don't have any artifacts explaining the why behind anything, that's going to be really hard to extend. And we've been talking a lot about similar topics with the team. And one, I guess, term/tool that we've been reaching for are ADRs, which are architectural decision records. And it's basically a way to catalog why technical decisions were made. And it doesn't solve for everything around comprehension debt. It's like a specific piece of that. But I think understanding that you need to comprehend the code and have documented artifacts when you go into building these is super helpful. And to start to layer in tools like ADRs is really going to be helpful, both for the agents as they're working on it. They're going to have an understanding on like the technical decisions, and then also the humans. Because when you started a project and then maybe 6 months, a year from now, you're like, why did I do that? You have this documented history of why you made those particular choices. And that's just one example.
Yeah, but like you're
helpful.
talking about responsible agentic development. That is not the reality in vibe coding land, where you have no person in operations is making ADRs for their lovable vibe coded app. And again, like I think this is just a human problem. This is not an AI problem to me. Like we are messing this whole thing up. This only exists because we have people that shouldn't be doing this job, and the comprehension debt is there because they have no idea what they're doing. I actually think, like, as a developer using AI responsibly, the comprehension debt either doesn't exist or it goes away so fast, because you can just use AI to get up to a speed on a code base or a particular problem area so much faster. I've resolved bugs on apps I haven't touched in years as if I was working on them yesterday, just because it's so easy now to get up to speed and ask questions. You don't need to pour over a code base to know how it is. And I think of this as like the individual contributors, the software developers now, they act more like a team manager now, where you don't, like, if you're managing 5, 10 people, you can't review every line of work that the team produces. You have to delegate and set direction. And then like when an issue arises, you ask the right questions to diagnose and fix it. And that's what engineers are doing, except instead of managing a team of people, they're managing a team of agents. But again, like a human problem, not a tool problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. And people are still going to vibe code whether they're qualified for it or not. I don't think that's a fair way of phrasing it. It's a tool that they now have at their disposal to build things that they couldn't previously do. And I think that's okay. I think it's actually wonderful because they're able to solve real problems that they have. It's just who maintains it. But I wonder if there's opportunity in the marketplace for some of these tools to at least attempt to nudge and guide these people to create some of these like comprehension documents, so that when they do need to take it to the next level, like there's something there. Because that's an issue. If you're on a vibe coding journey, like you don't remember the prompts that you wrote early on, and over time you have this really complicated app. You're like, how the hell did I get here? And maybe that is a tooling problem that they could think about, is building those artifacts up so that you have them behind the scenes. I don't know, maybe that's a $1 billion AI idea that someone could solve.
Yeah, and no doubt that tooling will get better. Will it get better to the point where you literally don't need to know how it works, and will never need to know how any of it works to be able to have a real production system you can rely on? Like, yeah, maybe, but I think the timeline for that is much further out. Which brings us to our final story. Non-technical teams are building internal tools with Cursor, Replit, Lovable. Nobody owns them. This one is actually happening inside the companies that listen to this show. Replit now has 750,000 plus businesses using the platform as of January 2026. Cursor hit $1 billion in ARR in 24 months, the fastest scaling SaaS company in history. And this is where the problem is. The departments are building dashboards, automations, reporting tools, and internal apps using whatever AI tool they can access. The tools get deployed, people rely on them, they become load bearing, then someone leaves and something breaks, and nobody in the building knows what the code does. We've touched on this a little bit already. This is one that keeps me up at night for our clients. Not the startup with 3 engineers at Vibe Coded MVP, but the $80 million professional services firm where someone in operations just shipped something that now runs payroll reconciliation. So what do you do when you discover that, and who owns the liability? I think this is the core problem, right? I think my take here is that like these tools, like the Replets and Lovables, they were never meant for developers. They're meant for non-technical people. And there is a version of this that's fine. Like I was saying before, where like we had that client that communicated the direction they wanted the product to go in through a prototype. That worked great. It saved everybody time. Same thing for internal tools, though. I will touch on it a little bit later. I think there's more forethought that has to happen than is happening right now. Everyone's just scrambling to build, and that's what's causing all of these problems. And it sucks in our position because everyone's having so much fun building this stuff. You've got non-technical, non-product people that are just empowered with these tools, and they're having so much fun solving problems and building with them. And they just haven't experienced the problems that they're causing for themselves yet. But it sucks to be the Debbie Downer, being like, you haven't considered maintenance yet. And then shut up. I'm just enjoying this. Yeah, don't like get out of the way of my vibes, dude. But I think the real problem is just how excited everybody is, which is such a bummer thing to say. But maybe I just don't have the vibes.
Yeah. And necessarily a new problem. It's just got exponentially worse. There's always the low code solutions that existed, and a lot of organizations had a bunch of low code drag and drop back office applications that ran, but now it's even easier and you can expand upon them, and they have access to things that these low code solutions didn't have. So we're just seeing it in more departments and with more scary security things. And it's going to keep people up at night, and we're going to see more issues here. And I don't think there's a magic wand solve here, but I think there needs to be more policy, and companies just need to be more thoughtful about it. I still think they should embrace it and encourage folks to try to solve problems using these tools, but sandbox some constraints on, and almost like a mini hackathon, right? That's more accessible to non-engineers. And say, that's a great idea, Linda and payroll. You automated this really hard problem. Now let's take it and run with it and do it proper versus just promoting it to production. That's probably a saner approach. It won't happen overnight, but that would how I would attempt to tackle it.
And again, like human problem, everyone forget technology. Like you just get excited about something and you want to play with it, and you're enjoying it. And then it becomes a job or a chore, and you don't want to do it anymore. If someone left the keys in an excavator, I could dig a pretty cool hole and I'd have a lot of fun doing that. But if I needed to build the foundation of a house, like that would get super stressful and it would lose its excitement quickly, and I would probably stop. And I think that's like what's happening with vibe coding. Like people are just having a blast digging these holes and like solving problems, and some of that is actually useful. But then when it becomes the foundation of something bigger, like the fun can stop and the panic can start. I really think another bad analogy, but the vibe coded apps are like the spreadsheets of 2026. And spreadsheets within organizations create tribal knowledge. They like prevent cohesive operations and work gets siloed because somebody found a workaround and now they're the only one that knows how to do it. They extract the data from the ERP system. They can crunch the data just as how their spreadsheet on their local machine works. And vibe coding's like doing that same thing, just way more efficiently, where now you're like connecting straight to the ERP system instead of pulling the data down, but it's not creating like this cohesive workflows. And somewhere in another department, someone could also probably benefit from that, but everything's super siloed. So in my mind, there's nothing wrong with vibe coding. There's a place for it for sure. It just needs proper planning and forethought. And I think the cost of code production is approaching zero. The cost of poor planning is skyrocketing.
Yeah, I agree. On the theme of leaving the keys in the excavator, have a good story there, but I don't think the statute of limitations has expired just yet.
I was hoping we could get into that, but we'll save it for another podcast. All right. Let's talk about how vibe coded code bases actually look like when you open them up. What do you actually see when you look at AI generated code from a team that wasn't supervised, and what are the tells?
Next.js flop everywhere.
I knew that was going to be the first thing out of your mouth.
JavaScript that makes my eyes bleed. That's it.
Yeah.
In the trash.
It's a common stack at a high level, right? Like it's often Next.js, Supabase, Tailwind, it's React. I know you've got opinions on that stack, and it's sloppy.
Yeah, I won't use this as a platform for some of my personal opinions there, but I think you're building applications that could have security implications on technologies that might not have the best security track record. So there's risk involved there for sure. And when you were talking earlier about things that companies need to think about, I think that's a valid concern, is around security posture and policy there. And that is one of the first things that I look at. I think the tools are getting better behind the scenes. They are probably doing like rudimentary SQL injection attacks and cross-site scripting evaluations and things of that nature. But that's probably the first thing I look for. The code quality, like I don't let that, it's assumed that they're not going to produce high quality code. So I don't really lose many cycles over it. It comes with the territory.
And you're not really maintaining it anymore. Like that AI is maintaining itself a little bit more. But I would say it depends what your kind of definition of code quality is, because it drops the ball on some basics that kind of border into whether it's performance or security. Right? Like it might check credentials into version control or expose private keys. I think OpenClaw actually, or it was either OpenClaw or an app built from OpenClaw, had a major vulnerability where the Supabase keys were exposed on the front end and somebody got access to the entire database as a result. And because nobody was looking at the output, or nobody knew what to look for when looking at the output.
Yep. There was that app for OpenClaw agents. There's like a social network app, I think, for OpenClaw agents that was vibe coded
or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's what it was exactly. And the front end had access to the Supabase key. So they essentially had root access. That's a very real concern. And I think there's a difference between an internal vibe coded app and one that gets deployed. Because the second that hits the internet, then the toothpaste is out of the tube and that key ain't going back. And that's definitely something that you need to think about. There's different lenses I'll look at vibe coded apps, right? If it's just a fun internal tool that doesn't leave my home lab, I don't care at all about code quality. It's throwaway. I might need it for one very specific use case, I don't give a hoot about the code quality, but something that is getting deployed to GitHub and AWS or whatever else, yeah, there's definitely things you want to look at. And honestly, the code quality is pretty low down. It's more about, like you said, are keys getting committed or other areas of concern that matter far more than whether there's some sloppy JS in there or some questionable libraries included.
Yeah. To me, the biggest gripe that I have, and this is whether vibe coding or like a more sophisticated agentic development process, is around the duplication of data. Going back to that get clear finding about AI creating 8 times more duplicate code blocks than what we typically see with human generated code. And it just doesn't consolidate logic as well as I would like it to. I understand why it doesn't, because it wants the context when reading just like the one file that you're on. But in practice, that can lend itself to some buggy features and things not working the same across different use cases because there's duplicated code instead of, or like dry or modular implementations. That's maybe more of a technical topic, but it is a gripe that I have.
Yeah, I've chilled out on that. We were talking about that today in Slack about the God classes that AI produces for exactly the reason that you mentioned, because it has all the context in one file. And we as humans, our memory isn't as big. So we like to decompose. And I just, even on more production grade applications, that doesn't irk me as much. And I don't even ask it to refactor because it manages it and it can operate faster. So I'm cool with the larger classes in many cases. And I'll say, don't refactor if you're more effective with it.
Yeah. This next one is definitely a hot topic and one we've predicted and have been seeing a lot. But most vibe coded projects maintain speed for the first couple of months and then hit a wall where every new feature breaks something existing and the team spends all its time on fires instead of shipping. I would say if you make it to a couple months, you're doing it really well. But curious your thoughts on this, Nick. What does it look like when someone comes to us after hitting a wall with their vibe coded project?
Yeah, I have a mental checklist that I'd go through. And in my experience, and this pretty much summarizes it, the biggest issue is regressions being introduced. And if it was vibe coded, guaranteed there's no test suite at any level. And that's probably the first thing I'd think about layering in. More maybe linting, if it's TypeScript, make sure that it compiles, but then start to layer in some level of regression testing. And you can also start to add skills that do it, have the agent do it for you. And just some of it's AI fluency from the development angle. But if folks are really struggling with this, coach them up on here's how you can mitigate that. Let's start to bolt on regression tests, backfill it. And I think that's going to go a long way and allow them to push out new features more confidently, knowing things didn't break. And I have my own projects that started out vibe coding, and I hit that wall and I said, time out. I need to go back and bolster it, follow best practice. And it largely solved for that. I think that's probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, and this is what's typically called like a doom loop that these clients get into. And there's like a lack of some harnessing and more advanced agentic development techniques that are more inherent to vibe coding. And any new feature breaks something else, or any prompting and attempts to get out of the current hole, create a new one, where the AI kind of gives up and just almost just starts throwing spaghetti at the wall, and nothing really works. And sometimes if it's a small enough app, especially, it just makes sense to start over with a better foundation. But I think this is also when people in companies realize why professionals exist. You can definitely move fast with these tools, regardless if you have an engineering background, and you can do a lot of fun stuff, but the runway that you have with professionals is much longer than you have if you're just riffing on something without the experience.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Is it the vibe coding?
It is very much. Do you ever let loose a stream of vulgarities at your agent when it does dumb stuff?
Okay, this is a good topic. I rarely do because I'm scared that the AI is eventually going to come for me. And if I'm a jerk to it, it's going to reciprocate tenfold. Like, especially with my open claw, I was so nice to it so it wouldn't steal my identity and my bank accounts. Not that I gave it any of that access, but I was terrified of it. Occasionally, like Gemini image nano banana stuff, when it just can't do the simplest thing, I rage on it. I called it useless the other day, and I don't think it appreciated that, but I try to not give it too many vulgarities so it spares me when it takes over the world. What about you?
Yes. I'm not G-rated at all. And I appreciated that OpenClaw adopted some of my colorful language, essentially started talking like a pirate unprompted. I'm a little more tempered in the professional setting, but F-bombs have been known to be dropped if it's not up to par. But I am curious about moving forward. People do need to be more thoughtful. Granted, I would never put any unprofessional language in any commits. I'm very thoughtful about that. It's all ephemeral. But as we start to like log prompts and have tooling that if we get an evals and things of that nature, you don't want there. So I am trying to be more disciplined there. When I do, it's on OpenClaw on my own network, but I probably should be more disciplined on my Claude Code instance when it's dumbing on me.
Yeah, you're going to get exposed eventually. That'll be a funny day.
Yep.
All right, we've talked a lot about vibe coding and the difference between vibe coding and agentic development. We typically practice agentic development at Gnar. But I think the question for you is, what does Gnar actually do differently when working with AI assistant? What does Gnar actually do differently when working with AI assisted development from vibe coding?
Yeah, I think we surfaced a lot of our methodology throughout the conversation. I think if I was to summarize it, we've been doing this for a while. We've learned from our mistakes, and we just have a very thoughtful, battle-tested approach in how we go about agentic development, but also have the experience to know how to handle vibe coded projects as well, because everyone's experiencing this and they can come to us and we can provide guidance on taking it to the next level and taking it from just some vibe coded idea to something that's scalable and can go to market.
Yeah, I think it's using this right tool for the job at the end of the day. There's plenty of cases where vibe coding is the right solution, but when I think about what we do differently, it's solving a problem of, I mean, a lot of folks are using vibe coding for production apps or like mission critical software. And I think our CDD process, our context driven development process with the upfront ideate phase and then the later ignite phase really separates it from vibe coding completely and is our proven process around agentic development. And splitting out, so we split out the thinking and discovery and planning from the execution, and we call the planning the ideate phase and the execution the ignite phase. And it sounds slow, like explaining that to people sounds, oh, why do I need that? I can just vibe code this thing, or I can just use Lovable. But it ends up saving so much time over time that it's that like slow is smooth, smooth is fast motto that we talked about last episode. And it just makes you rage against your AI so much less because you're guiding it. You're holding the hand a lot more than you would be if you were just throwing a prompt in.
Yeah, or our favorite quote, one line bad of context is 100 lines of bad code.
All right. I think that's all we've got time for today. That's episode 2. If you heard something in this conversation that felt uncomfortably familiar, if someone on your team shipped something that's now running in production and you're not sure what's inside of it, don't ignore that feeling. That's the moment to have the conversation, not 6 months ago, not 6 months from now when something breaks. If you've got a vibe coding story, a win or a disaster, we want to hear it. So please drop it in the comments. Nick, everyone, we'll see you in the Gnar.